Well, there you go. You did great.
You are a pleasure.
Oh my gosh, thank you. And thank you for saying it like you mean it.
Oh, if you haven't figured it out yet, I don't say much I don't mean.
Welcome to the Relatable Leader podcast.
This is your behind-the-scenes access to coaching that supports your leadership. And now, here's your host, certified trainer and professional coach, Catherine Goggia.
Hello, leaders. Thanks so much for taking your valuable time to listen to the Relatable Leader podcast. We're here to help you optimize your skills and passion to increase job satisfaction, productivity, effectiveness, and influence. Please be sure to review the backlog of episodes and seek out titles of interest to you. In this episode, I interview management consultant Liz Kislik. Wow, what a great conversation with Liz. She has so many years of experience, so much knowledge to bring, and best of all, she's really fun to talk with. You're going to hear her critical thinking skills are right there, so I'm eager to share this discussion with you. First, a personal update. Things have been kind of crazy since my last podcast episode. We've had our first snow already, which usually doesn't happen until the weekend after Thanksgiving, and my power has been shut down 3 times, at one of them for several days in a row. This is happening because of PG&E here in Northern California. Since they've already burnt down the entire town of Paradise and Concow, now they're going to be more cautious and, shut down the power on big windy days. Well, this, of course, has completely thrown off my workflow process, which is why my podcast episode schedule has been thrown off. Right now, our power is supposed to go off again this morning. So I'm in front of my microphone with you at 3 o'clock in the morning, trying to get in front of this next power shutdown. So good morning, beautiful people. Great to be here with you. We've had these huge windstorms, so we're kind of living in our own pine needle version of Groundhog Day, where every weekend we get out, use the blower, get those pine needles up, rake, get them out of here, because of course we are still in a high fire danger. That's the really exciting piece of this, right? Then the next week there's a huge windstorm again. We wake up on the weekend, it's as if we hadn't cleaned our yard at all, and we start all over. That's another aspect of just trying to stay in front of everything that's going on and stay safe. So I'm really happy to be here with you today in my studio, in front of the microphone, getting ready to rock and roll another podcast episode. On the training front, I facilitated 3 Mastering a Positive Attitude workshops. One was open to the general public, and exciting, 2 of these workshops were for employees at the same company, which is really fun for me because then I get to kickstart their reading in my book and all of the action assignments in the book. And it just so happens that these groups of people were really fun groups to work with. Had a great time with them. If any of you are listening, shout out to you. Thanks for some awesome training experiences with you. And as always, the great part about being a trainer is that I also learn from my participants when they're fully engaged with me. So really loving that, and thanks again. Coming up on my training schedule, I continue with the Coaching Employees and Conflict Resolution Skills series. If you work in the Butte County area and didn't catch those trainings, always remember our entire series repeats every spring and fall. So those will start up again in January 2020 if you're listening to this in live time. On Wednesday, October 30th, I will run my Facilitating Difficult Conversations webinar from 9 until 11 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. Also, in the Webinar Wednesday series on November 6th, the webinar is Navigating Conflict Sources. And on November 13th, Coaching High Performance. The registration links for these webinars are available through my website, relatableLeader.com. If you're here in Northern California with me and work in the Butte County or surrounding area, you can always join me for live workshops there at the training place at the Skyway Center, corner of Notre Dame and Skyway, coming up on November 14th. I'm facilitating multitasking for excellence from 8:30 until 11:30 in the morning. That's a fun workshop. Hope that you'll join me there. We'll get to the interview with Liz Kislik right after this message.
Live It, Mastering Positive Attitude Habits will help you work smart and live happy. Live It is a textbook and workbook in one, with note-taking and action planners designed into the book. The content is based on activities training participants rated with 5 stars for more than 15 years. What makes this book different from other attitude books is you have everything you need to move from thinking to doing, from waiting to changing, and from surviving to thriving. Even people who are generally positive appreciate these action assignments that help you shake off attitude blockers, reconnect with your life vision, and demonstrate the consistent behaviors to move closer to goals in every area of your life. Get the book on Amazon today and get to work in the 8 key areas of your life. If nothing changes, nothing changes. Go to Amazon now and purchase Catherine Goggia's book, Live It, Mastering Positive Attitude Habits. Her 15 practical tips for managing your mindset have already inspired thousands of people, and they can help you work smart and live happy too.
It was a genuine pleasure to speak with Liz Kislik. She was delightfully engaged in the discussion and offered many interesting insights, including her approach to coaching managers and dealing with family-owned businesses. Check out this bio. For 30 years as a management consultant, executive coach, and facilitator, Liz Kislik has helped clients such as American Express, Orvis, the Girl Scouts, Gunther Rinker, Janssen Pharmaceuticals, and Highlights for Children. Boy, that was fun to see there in the lineup. She's helped all of them and others solve their thorniest problems while strengthening both their top and their bottom lines. Folks, isn't that so important? Every day you get up and you look in the mirror. Got to be aware of both your top and your bottom lines. So thanks to Liz for helping raise our awareness in these areas. Her specialty is developing high-performing leaders and workforces for organizations from the Fortune 500 and national nonprofits to family-run businesses. Liz has coached and mentored employees from the C-suite. You know, that's up top in that helicopter view. I remind you again, frontline employees, their view, ground level. Supervisors, balcony, managers climb up in the trees and in the C-suite. We get out of those trees, get up in the helicopter using all of the appropriate safety gear. We do come back down into the trees to make sure that we know what's going on in our organization, but we certainly don't want to spend too much time on the balcony running the business, because then we are not strategizing, of course, working on the business instead of in the business. So here comes in Liz talking with those C-suite leaders, doing executive coaching with the managers, and organizations improve due to her expertise. She's worked with vice presidents, human resource professionals, and department supervisors, motivating them through her wit, wisdom, and humanity. Liz is a frequent contributor to Harvard Business Review, Forbes, and Entrepreneur, and is known as the author of the Workplace Wisdom blog, where she offers valuable perspectives and tips for developing leaders, managing teams, and improving the customer experience. People that have been with me since I started the podcast, you know I am big on customer service, so I'm really excited to talk with Liz. Liz's articles have been included in the Harvard Business Press book's Guide to Motivating People and Dealing with Difficult People, and in the Wall Street Journal's Morning Download. Yay! And she has been interviewed by the Australian Broadcasting Corporation, The Muse, European CEO Magazine, and the Financial Times Ignites. She spoke at the TEDx Baylor School on why there's so much conflict at work and what you can do to fix it. And you can find that TEDx talk on YouTube. She's also served as adjunct faculty at Hofstra University and, wow, New York University. Liz knows that in business, there's almost always a way to help things work better. She can speak for you on many topics, including how leaders can create a productive business culture, communications in business, including what goes wrong, and people, how to make it right. Facilitating better teamwork among employees, including what to do when a team is unable to work well together and how to deal with problem employees. You know, all those big hitter topics that I also train. So this is really fun for me because I get to learn from Liz as well as you as we go through this discussion. One more thing she can help you with is employee engagement, retention, and of course, attracting top talent. That's quite a list of accomplishments, isn't it? So let's just top that off with icing on the cupcake by also being on the Relatable Leader podcast. Liz, join me on Skype.
Hello, Liz Kislik, and thank you so much for sharing your birthday with the Relatable Leader audience, and happy birthday to you.
Oh, thank you, Catherine. It seems to me that having a birthday is one of the most relatable things a person can do. We all have them.
Yes, and for me, I'll speak for myself, always glad when I do.
Oh my, I love my birthday.
Do you have any special plans for today that you feel like sharing?
I don't actually have any special plans other than it's just been so nice. You know, people send texts and emails and call, and I always consider it a special day. And at some point, my husband and I will do something and we'll call it my birthday celebration, and that will be good. I think the whole month is sort of birthday time.
I have friends that use the whole month to celebrate their birthday too, and I'm all for it. And I'm just really glad that it worked out on your schedule so that we get to be part of your special day. And I've been thinking about, Liz, that Libras are all about balance and fairness and are known for having the ability to weigh the pros and cons of just about any situation. So I'm wondering, Libra, how have these traits influenced your career?
You're certainly right about balancing the pros and cons. I think I do that as something I do almost instinctively.
Yes.
And it has proven to be extremely valuable in my work because a lot of people actually don't do it. They see what they think is the answer or the solution right in front of them, and they hook into that first thing and just go for it. And I think it's a really useful skill, and I try to teach it as much as I can.
Yes, and I understand your feeling that it's not so much of a formula of attaining balance, but people like you are wired for that. And I can imagine that when you were younger, and certainly this was the case for me too, although I'm Capricorn, not Libra, but I just was innately drawn to having balance. And isn't it interesting when you can see something so clearly, but another person can look at that exact same situation and they just don't see what you see at all when you have that wonderful Libra balance?
So absolutely right about seeing things from different perspectives and actually thinking they are different things, like the old story of the blind men and the elephant. It may be the very same situation, but when you see it from a different angle, it looks different. And some of my clients could tell you that one of my watchwords is accurate but incomplete. Because
you got an immediate, I'm sorry that you just got such an immediate reaction from me, because not 2 hours ago I was in front of an audience of 30 to 40 people talking about, if you think you have facts, how do you know for sure that they're accurate and complete? So thank you. Please continue. I just couldn't believe that you said it.
Yeah, because the set of facts you have, they are facts perhaps, but they're the set you have.
Yes.
And there is always, at a minimum, if not more on the periphery, past your own vision, a kind of larger peripheral view, there's always history.
Yes.
So even if two people are standing at exactly the same vantage point and are theoretically seeing the same thing, we mostly see it somewhat differently, which in fact makes life much more interesting.
Yes.
Sometimes people think, why can't everybody see it my way? In fact, that's boring and you stop progressing. But because we do see things differently, there are a lot of challenges to getting on the same page.
There certainly are. And of course, those different perspectives help us be better collaborators and eventually, create continuous improvement in our organizations. And you've been in the consulting and facilitation business for 30 years and helping companies scale their top and bottom lines. And I'm wondering, Liz, if you would please share with our audience, how did you get started in the business of helping organizations reach their highest potential?
So I've always liked to figure out problems. That has, I think, been something that's been with me my whole life. I like to improve things. I like them to be better. And whether you look at it as reducing suffering, reducing friction, or gaining all the potential there is in an opportunity, I love all that. I just like making stuff work.
Yeah.
And when I was, in my 20s, I was working for a marketing agency and having a really wonderful career trajectory there. And the owner died suddenly, and there was no real succession plan. And after a couple of years, it just was clear that it made much more sense for me to leave and go out on my own. Mm-hmm. And I already had an industry reputation. So a week after I left, other consultants had subcontracted work to me.
Oh,
and I was working right away, never stopped. And I've shifted my focus from time to time. But it has just gone on to have more opportunities to fix stuff, figure things out, and help people see a broader perspective so that they can fix them themselves.
Yes, and as you transition through those different perspectives, I wonder if you could give us sort of a generalized idea of where you started with your focus in comparison to where you are now, and whether or not you have found yourself kind of getting more niche and focused, or if it's more about getting broader and bringing more and more areas to organizations, or somewhere in between. How has that looked for you?
When I started, the company I had worked for focused on telemarketing, inside sales, that kind of stuff. I mean, it was actually outside sales because it was an outsource company.
Right.
And I did everything there, from managing a staff that counted paper forms before we were computerized, in fact, to running a more than 300 employee call center, and also managing client services. And, I basically did everything there was to do there, practically. So when I started consulting, it was mostly in the telemarketing area that migrated to customer service when telemarketing started being not such a wonderful thing in many ways. So customer service, and that then went on to call center management in general. And while I would be at client companies, I would become aware of all kinds of problems, confusions, disturbances in the company, because, everything that goes wrong eventually ends up in the call center when you're trying to help a customer. So I would know about these issues and would, where I had the opportunity, explain to the leadership that I could see that there were these other issues that were creating the problems in the call center. And over time, there were more and more leaders who turned to me for that kind of insight, and then I would be able to participate in everything from their strategy sessions to leadership development work. So over time, I migrated more and more to this kind of leadership-focused and organizational work. And it's been very satisfying.
I was going to say, it's an exciting journey as you're speaking. I'm a visual thinker, so I can just see, like ripples in a pond, your influence spreading wider and wider in impactful ways. You've worked with some large, very well-known companies, Liz, and I'm wondering if you would please share with us an example of one of your favorite success stories.
Oh, goodness, that's such a good question, and I have to think about that. One of the things I always tell clients to do is not just to look at the mountains ahead, but to see how far you've come. I forget this stuff almost as soon as I do it, and I'm looking at the current kinds of problems. But let me give you one example, but I'm actually not going to tell you who it is because...
Sure, I expect that. That's cool.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't expect company names, but I love the story. And just to give you a second there to further think about that, I know what you mean. I know it's really popular on podcasts to talk about mistakes and what we've learned from them, and I think there's value in that. But I share with you that I usually don't take even 10 minutes to do that little accolades pat on the back because I'm focused on the next thing. So I appreciate you taking time to share a success with us.
So with one organization, there was a real conflict between the headquarters staff and the field staff. They had operations in many parts of the country. And as is often the case, the people who are in field offices feel that the folks in headquarters don't understand anything about their travails, the reality on the ground, etc. And the people in headquarters cannot understand why the folks in the field don't just follow the policy, turn in the information, whatever it happens to be.
Right.
And the process of getting people to meet with each other as humans, and this happens in all kinds of situations, not as sort of armed nation states. And you can have this, okay, I'm thinking of another circumstance in which this was two departments facing off.
Sure.
But getting them to understand that they all subscribe to the larger goals of the organization, and that the trick is finding ways to work together to make that real, as opposed to assuming that some other group in the same company is actually the enemy.
Right.
And those are very tricky situations, but really satisfying.
How did you help them navigate that?
First, by interviewing everybody separately. I don't mean every single person in field offices, but, sampling usually works. But you actually have to hear individual stories of what went wrong when, and why it's so terrible that this is the requirement or the situation or the deficit or whatever it is. And by collecting these individual stories and then applying a kind of pattern recognition, You can start looking for the actual barriers to communication, to understanding of the other's needs, and then you can, and then there are a variety of different things you do, and you have to gauge the group. Can you sit them down for kind of workshop stuff? Sometimes that works. Sometimes you have to take them out drinking. I don't recommend that too often. And you have to be careful about how they behave before you do that. You have to be sure that people are willing to participate well. So on premises, off premises, structured workshop format, sometimes it's just getting a couple of people in a room and facilitating. And at the end of the day, I think it's the facilitations that can sometimes have the biggest benefit, where, as we were saying before, Catherine, it's the same thing. You see the red side of the block, and the other person sees the green side of the block. And how do you shift things just enough so they can see, oh, there actually is some of that other color there. That other person does see something else. Oh my goodness. And starting that kind of process of awakening to the fact that it's different for the other person.
Yes, and I'm thinking about how rewarding that kind of work is when both people have the shared goal of seeing both colors.
Yes.
How have you handled it when one of those people does not want to see the other color, adamantly does not? How might you change your approach in that case?
So sometimes you have to back up, and at least for me, try to stand at an even greater distance to see why that might be.
Yes.
And often what you find is that there has been some directive from a current leader, an historical one that was passed down from 30 years ago. There is some directive that has set one or more participants up to actually believe a certain thing to be true when it may never have been true, or it has become irrelevant, and they've never gone through the mental exercise of believing that something else could be different. So sometimes it's not that they themselves are so bloody intractable. They actually think they are doing the thing they're supposed to do.
Yes.
When it's that, you can have this kind of flash of the blindingly obvious, and all of a sudden it shifts and they can't believe it. That's one kind of situation. Sometimes you do get the thing, though, where a person is just ornery. And then you have to assess. I can assess as the outsider, and then the most senior leader has to assess. Is it worth our trying to change this person's mind? Or in fact, are they counter mission? Are they so strongly wedded to this belief they have that they are not even willing to see how it is damaging the mission or the strategy or the organization itself?
Yes.
And unfortunately, sometimes it does happen that people really dig their heels in and refuse to change their minds. Some folks have a hard time shifting. That's not too typical, thank goodness, but every once in a while you just can't keep them in their role. Sometimes you can find another place for them in the organization. Sometimes it just doesn't work. But most times it's that people have developed patterns or habits that are based on what they believe was an instruction they were given. And if you can go back, makes me think of, what's it called in robots, the prime directive?
Yes.
Right? If you can go back and change the prime directive, You then have to work on their patterns and habits, so they may be creaky and rusty, and you have to oil them up and make them cozy. But if you change that original directive, you can often get people to start to come around.
I think all aspects of your answer are incredibly insightful. And, you were talking about the robot there. I think I'm picturing, too, sometimes to get at that history and to get at that initial directive that I sometimes feel like I'm out in the field in an archeological dig.
Yes.
Because sometimes, I don't know if this is true of your experience, but for me, sometimes people don't even remember that initial directive specifically themselves as much as it is a feeling that they've carried into the future with them.
That's correct.
And it's only when, we get out there and we start digging, and I really appreciate your guidance for all of us to have those individual interviews and get after those individual stories. And I think it's important to get after those truly individually, because sometimes we might not hear the stories of some people unless we take the time to talk with them individually. So I thank you for all of that. I really want to encourage people to go to your website. It is absolutely beautiful. And I don't know who took those photographs of you, but the moment I saw it, I thought, well, I need that person to take photographs of me. So that was really wonderful. And one line that resonates with me, Liz, is that you have the ability to motivate people with your wit, wisdom, and humanity. I just really love it. And I'm wondering, in addition to problem solving, which you mentioned earlier, what are some of the other practical skills you possess that have opened that gateway for you to be able to use your unique qualities in such a powerful way?
Well, that's a deep question.
See how I am?
Yeah.
Happy birthday. This is my birthday gift to you, asking you questions like this.
Very good. So I accept. So one of the skill sets has to do with a combination of, I'll call it a trait or a characteristic, which is curiosity. I am intensely curious, and therefore the skill set of what you could call either observation or attention or noticing. I like to know stuff. And so I watch and I listen and I pay attention. And therefore, I am aware of things. And it's easy as an outsider. It is much harder when you're on the inside. But I become aware of things that people in the working environment don't even know is happening there every day.
Exactly.
So that there have been times, it's so funny, when, I don't know, after a half day of interviewing, I'll check back with whoever the decision maker is who hired me or whatever, and they'll ask me some question, and I will give them a whole set of observations, and they'll say, how did you know that? Because I haven't been there long enough to really know, but it's the paying attention and then the pattern recognition. And that comes from the curiosity to learn how things work and the experience of doing it for 30 years. So nobody should think that they're supposed to be able to do this if they're in their second managerial job and they've been working for, 6 years. They can be starting to do it, but I have the huge advantage at this point of almost a library in my head of all the things I've seen.
Yes.
The other thing is, and I'm not sure if this is a skill either or a characteristic, I really am optimistic. And I believe that while you're alive, there's always something you can do. And that we don't have to just live with a bad situation. And yet in many companies, people talk about things as if it's a permanent millstone around their necks and no one has any choice at all. And I just don't believe that. So I am always looking for what's the best way to solve the problem, and simultaneously, what's the best next step we could take. So how do we start to get some traction on this soon so people will see that we are working on it, that something is happening, and they can start to have some hope and some wiggle room again, if that makes sense.
It does. And also making sense to me is your distinction about, well, I'm not sure if this is a skill or a trait, because in one way, if it's a skill, we should be able to go in and train it, even if it's not a natural talent for the person. And it's interesting, as a trainer, as a coach, I've been asked before to try to teach people how to be more observant or teach people how to be more optimistic. And of course, there are things that we can do to lead people in that direction. But at this point in my career, I do, to be honest with you, Liz, give a lot of thought to the fact that I think there are people like you, perhaps like me, that are naturally wired to be observant and naturally wired to be more optimistic. I'm not quite convinced that these are trainable traits. What do you think?
So I don't know if they're trainable in the classic behavioral sense.
Right.
But I do think that we can give people new ways of thinking that, if they practice, will strengthen even the littlest kernel of, I'm not going to call it optimism or hopefulness, but a kind of reality check. Let me give you an example.
Perfect.
So if someone thinks, oh, this just sucks and it's going to suck forever and there's nothing I can do, I would ask them questions like, well, what's the worst thing that could happen? Or what are you worried about? And then take that 2 more levels, like, if that happens, what's the worst thing, or what are you worried about? Sort of like the 5 whys.
Yes.
And just ask about the worries. And then pick out some of them and say, well, what could we do about that? What could anybody do about that? What could somebody do if they were in a different situation? Just to get their mind wrapped around the fact that there might be something to do. And if you persist in a kind of gentle nudging of this, as opposed to having them feel you've called them on the carpet, or if they can't find an answer, they're stupid, that's no good, because then they can't think at all. But if you can kindly help them think at all about solutions, I tell them that worrying is one of the best forms of preparation.
I love it.
Because once you worry, then you can debug the process.
Yes.
It's like having an escape route, or an evacuation plan for a fire, or any of those things. It's the what ifs, and you can practice thinking of those. And so if you can get somebody to do 1 round, and in 6 months you can get them to think of 3 what ifs,
yes,
they're already hugely better.
Yes, and it's a measurable progress. I am results oriented, but I think sometimes people miss out on measuring progress and acknowledging progress. And I think that you've really zeroed in on that. And I do just want to jump in for the members of the Relatable Leader audience who are currently going through the coaching series with me, when I encourage you to stay in the question and balance sharing and telling. Liz just gave us a really good example as several questions that we can ask as we lead people to new ways of thinking, which is so, I think, very, very powerful. So thank you, Liz, for the specific examples that you give, because I think they're really useful. And I want to continue to build on your expertise, because I notice you have experience with family-run businesses. Yeah. And I'd like to talk more about that, because well, first of all, in my experience, that dynamic can present a certain flavor of difficulty that can be especially challenging to overcome. But the other component of that, in Northern California, where I'm working, there are a lot of family-run businesses, and we just happen to be in a trend right now with several of them where they have started to plateau a little bit. And so when you're hired as a consultant who can assist companies in getting unstuck or back on track for productivity and profits, I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit more about your process. Now, some of that you've already mentioned because you're going to hold interviews and hear their individual stories, certainly process recognition and barriers to communication, understanding needs. I am curious, though, myself about if there's anything a little bit different or specific to family-run businesses that you might add.
Okay, so what I love about family businesses is that there is a reality. Because it is the family, people in some ways don't feel like they have to hide how they are, tailor certain things. You can really get to the meat of the issues. Part of what makes it challenging, though, is, of course, in our families, we have huge numbers of unstated expectations of each other, and then another huge pile of stated expectations. Mm-hmm. Sometimes they're in conflict. And in the same way that we often expect the people who love us to just understand and just do what we want and all that kind of stuff, when you play that out in business, it can get really complex because you need to be clear, instructive, everybody needs to know their goals, all this kind of stuff. And the unstated things can create the kind of historical precedent for bad habit that we talked about before. So that's one set of things. The other thing that's so interesting is that in family businesses, there is often a heightened tension around the area of succession. And whether everybody in the family gets to be in the family business, must be in the family business, what kind of roles they're expected to play, etc. So there are all kinds of reasons that they can be really fraught. Mm-hmm. What's great, the greatest thing about family businesses, though, is if you make the business work better, it's better for the family too. It's,
yes,
you know, right?
Yes,
it's like,
I do.
Whatever the upside of a double whammy is, it's like that. And potentially for generations, it's really exciting. So one of the things in the family business, it's the same kind of process. Lots of observation, lots of questions. And maybe I'll talk about another piece that is also true in non-family businesses, but seems particularly relevant here. And that is almost the conceptual and interpersonal equivalent of what in a software or product-based kind of business might be prototyping, mm-hmm. which is sending up trial balloons. Well, what would you think about this kind of situation, or if we had that kind of relationship? Testing the waters. If you develop the kind of trusting relationship where people will level with you, then you can propose things that they can't propose to each other. As part of the facilitation, I get to hypothesize all kinds of things and encourage them to react to me, not to each other.
Yes.
So then we can get all these ideas on the table, or all these concerns on the table, where we can see them. They're now available for study and analysis and you know, picking apart or whatever it is, but not in that kind of attacking, you know, you never remember to check the numbers on this, whatever it is.
Right.
And so then you can have some real discussions. And part of what you have to figure out in a family, as anywhere, but more perhaps, is who actually plays which roles. I don't just mean job assignments, but roles. Who's the conciliator? Who's the negotiator? Who's the idea person? And are these their roles because they are historical or because they are natural to the humans who are in them? And when you start teasing that apart, it gives you a lot of room to break log jams that have existed in the past.
That's so exciting for me to hear. And one of my particular senses of current failure, in fact, would be not coming up with some magic bullet of a conversation where we can help, whether it's parents and their kids working in the family, or husbands and wives, or brothers and sisters, or even uncles. No matter what the dynamic, I have found it incredibly challenging to help them hold each other accountable to the same types of outcomes that we more easily hold people who aren't related to.
Yes.
And gosh, Liz, if you have the magic bullet fix of a conversation for me, I'd love to get better at this part.
If there were a magic bullet, I'd probably be doing something else. You know, that because, wow, that would be fantastic. I find that these things are hugely reiterative. And you travel round and round, and you try to make the whole thing a little better and lift it up each time. Because so much, I mean, think about it. If you have to have a hard performance conversation with a relative and then have to sit with them at Thanksgiving.
Yes, this is what I'm talking about.
Yes. And not only might it be that they're mad with you, but their spouse may be mad with you, and their mother, who is your sibling, may be mad with you. And, you know, it's uncomfortable. It's really uncomfortable. So this is not a magic bullet at all, but let's call it a vector of approach.
Thank you. Perfect.
Okay. If the conversation isn't, you know, sort of, Steve, why are you screwing up the inventory? But is instead, our inventory situation seems to be thus and so. What can we do to make it better? The what could we do, the hypothetical, let's think of all the things we could do. How could we make this better? When it's in that more neutral positioning, it's almost like you're asking them to bring their best game instead of requiring them to defend themselves against you.
Right.
And I've often been in situations where I was either explicitly asked or just took the job of, in effect, speaking for the family member who was in the room, sometimes not in the room, and who you know can't today ask it in a good developmental way.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So let's make some progress first and then bring that family member back in, and then we can make progress together. But if people are afraid to speak or feel that they're under attack, it's hard to get anywhere.
It is, and I especially appreciate the respectful tone your suggestions create, because in those conversations, I don't expect that we're always going to agree on where we are or how we got here, but brainstorming in a respectful way about where do we go from here, I think is incredibly useful, because there's those two levels of dealing with what is visible, but your approach also helps us deal with that deeper level where things are, I would say, unseen, but super impactful in terms of limiting our growth.
Yes. And, Catherine, relevant to that point, in family businesses, perhaps more than other places, sometimes if people are feeling angry or pressed, they let it show in both tone and language in ways that might not be tolerated in non-family businesses.
Correct.
And one of the things that has been useful, and again, I don't know if it's characteristic or skill, is because I can say things in a neutral or questioning way, not like an interrogation, but curious.
Yes.
Things that might seem either harsh or attacking are neutralized. And because I will be acknowledging right away of whatever the level or type of participation it is, as opposed to the kind of cold shouldering you can sometimes get if a family member is sick of another family member and doesn't even want to pay attention to what they're talking about.
Yes.
So then you can continue to draw them out further instead of having them feel shut down. And the thing is, once you turn the wheel enough, people start getting used to the fact that, oh, we actually have a conversation going here.
Yes, and I think that there's a strong feeling that comes when people truly trust. In your case, you call it curiosity. In mine, I let people know I am full blast in discovery with you. In discovery about your viewpoint, in discovery about the other people, the situation, the company, and even further discovery about ourselves as we work through the situation together. So I thank you for reminding us the power of respect and being in discovery and not jumping to conclusions or think we know what's motivating other people, because we can't possibly guess correctly at what's motivating other people. We need for them to share that with us. And it's only through the kind of conversation that you're suggesting that they're going to feel safe to tell the truth. Would you have anything else to add to that, Liz?
I think you hit on it exactly. I am a strong proponent of safety and creating safety. What I caution people against is I don't think it is legitimate to ask for trust. I think you have to create safety, show that you will keep people safe, that you will not attack anybody, and then people can start to trust. But you can't demand it or require it.
I agree with you completely, and I don't know, I just really believe there's a certain feeling that comes over a room when we reach that place. And there's a strong feeling when we don't have that yet, and we need to slow down our pace a little bit and develop it. And I just want to thank you again for your insights specific to family-run businesses. And now we can take that bigger now. I want to address another trend that I've noticed in all kinds of organizations and across all industries, and get your insights into this situation. I find that people typically get on board with needing to hire help when they're growing at a quick rate. They just take a logical approach to, yes, we need help. But I've noticed sometimes that there's a reluctance to reach out and get help, especially at that top level of people when they've hit their ceiling and they need additional learning and expanded behaviors if we're going to continue to grow the company. But even when they can see very logically, whether it's in profits, whether it's in waste, any level of productivity, they can see that they're plateauing. They don't know what to do. And it's at that point that I see that there's sometimes a reluctance to reach out and get the help that seems to be obvious that it's needed. But we just circled back, didn't we, to I'm seeing both colors and they're sometimes just seeing that one color. What is your experience related to that?
So listening to you talk, I have to say I feel pretty happy that the majority of my clients are always looking for feedback. I'm talking about at the top levels.
Yes.
Are always looking for feedback about how they can do better, and some of my longstanding ones will just say, how could I have handled that better, et cetera, et cetera. So they're not closed off from that. They take it on the chin and they think about how to incorporate it. What you make me think about, though, is Carol Dweck's terminology about fixed mindset and growth mindset.
Oh, good.
And a growth mindset is when someone thinks of the mistakes, the things that go wrong, where they get stuck, as, something else I need to learn. I need to learn something new. I need to practice in a different way. But if I do those things, I'll be able to go forward. Fixed mindset thinks I have a certain capacity. Once I've hit the edge of that capacity, I'm done. And you can see this particularly, and a bunch of her work in figuring this out was with children. So if you tell somebody that they are good at math, and they do a problem set, and you look at it and you say, oh, this is wonderful, you're so good at math, and then you offer them another problem set, they often don't want to do it because they're afraid they won't do as well, and then they will lose their status and their personal sense of being good at math. Whereas a kid with a growth mindset, and when you say, oh, you worked very hard on those problems, good for you, then when you say, do you want another problem set, they say sure, because they know they can work hard again. And they're not as concerned about the perfection of it or maintaining a kind of image almost to themselves and to others. And it's very common to have people who are of a fixed mindset and will actually refuse help actively.
Yes.
So as not to be found wanting.
This is exactly what I'm addressing through this question with you, because I'm not at all surprised to find that your clients are eager to reach out and find out what they can learn. That's part of why they are your clients. And what I'm hoping is if I have just one person in my audience today who has been reluctant to hang their hat on that growth mindset and to realize if you need help, no harm, no foul, I'm completely on board with you about what is it that we need to learn.
Right.
Let's get there, because then it's just so exciting.
Right. Why stop? Why stop?
Yeah.
I have a coach, because if I could do everything perfectly, again, I would be doing something else,
Right.
What I would fix, I don't know, world peace.
Well, for starters.
I would love to do that.
Yes.
I'm not there yet, so
Yes.
obviously I need a coach. Everybody needs some kind of support. Everybody needs an editor. Everybody needs a sounding board. None of us holds all the necessary skills. And so whether you hire people or outsource activities or seek guidance in a variety of ways, and it doesn't have to be a specialist you pay. You can have a group of other business owners that you sit around with and talk about the things that blow up in your shop and find out what blows up in theirs and share. But everybody needs ideas beyond the ones in their heads.
Yes. I just recently watched on Netflix Inside Bill's Brain, which is a 3-part series about Bill Gates.
Uh-huh.
And to your point, he started in the 90s taking what he would call a think week, where any topic that he felt like he needed to learn more about, he would go get books on that topic and go off by himself in a small little cottage for a week.
Yes.
And learn. And I just really like that idea of a think week where you set it aside, that it's all about thinking through the problems that you're facing, going to the experts in the field and figuring it out.
Yes.
Very free. To me, I think of that as being a really freeing approach.
Yes.
To continuous improvement.
Yes. Another example of that might be helpful to some of your audience is something that happened to me. If you can tell that you are neglecting something, that you just can't get yourself to bear down and deal with it, then maybe it's time to get some help.
Oh, perfect.
I just talked to a woman who is going to help me with my LinkedIn page, which is totally credible now, but I know I could be doing more with it. And it has been on my list, and I, in fact, have multiple pages of notes, but it keeps going to the bottom of the pile. Now, I clearly cared enough about it to get started, and whether it's because I have higher priorities or because I don't know quite enough how to do it myself smoothly and easily, or any number of other reasons, if you find you're leaving something that you really want to address for a long time, it makes sense to get some guidance.
It sure does. And I think that the LinkedIn example is perfect about how you are applying these concepts of continuous improvement for yourself and how you've applied the learning. Do you mind if I ask, as you do that work, and I'm asking with regard to my audience again, because to identify this is what I'm neglecting. Here's the goal. What kind of help can I get to get there? What is your specific goal with your LinkedIn page?
So there's a sort of two-pronged thing. In the shorter term, I, like any business, needs to attract new business.
Gotcha.
And even though I have a 25-year client, I have a 15-year, even though I have these very long client relationships, no business can afford to have no pipeline. You have to be building business all the time. And LinkedIn is a place to do it, but I have not been activist about it. And just waiting for things to fall into your lap is never a good plan. So that's the first prong. And the second prong is I'm starting to work on a book. And at some point, my public persona, as demonstrated in social media, needs to be ready to be about the book, because there's this whole process of book launch and all that kind of stuff. So I'm looking at both the short term and the long term.
Fantastic. And there again, Liz has zeroed in on something very specific for us that we can all use and learn from as you set your goals, to look at that through that split screen, right? That on one half of the screen we have the short term, on the other half we have that long term, and are those going to merge together so that with each little activity you do, it's sort of building like dominoes falling toward that larger long-term goal for you. Really great stuff and specific content for us, Liz. I thank you for that. And I'm going to ask you a question that might just be tough to answer because I think there are so many variables, but I'm going to go ahead and put it out there and see what you do with that. And that is asking if there's an average length of time your contracts typically run. I know you have some long-term contracts that obviously it was such a great fit for both of you. You've stayed in it for several years, but is there a length of time your contracts typically run if an organization is to clearly experience measurable results?
Okay, so I'm not going to answer this in a simple way because it's all over the field.
Fair enough.
I have had clients where I went and did an assessment of whatever operation or situation seemed to be suffering, where I shared with them my feedback and conclusions and the things that I thought in big picture they could do. And they said, great, we can run with it now. And then I would hear from them periodically about how they ran with it.
Right.
And so there are some organizations that, based on cultural norm or the style of the senior executive, they want to know, and then they handle it themselves. And there are other places where they either want help with implementation, or in some ways, I'm like an extra executive.
Yes.
Who's floating and working wherever it is, sometimes double teaming a situation, stepping in if there isn't an executive on premises. I don't mean that in the day-to-day way, but in a kind of general way. And those go longer. The 25-year relationship that I mentioned, I'm not with them all the time. Some years we do a lot. Some years they're either very comfortable or struggling with something that's outside my realm or whatever. And then 2 years later, I'm back again. So that's all over the field. In terms of coaching specifically, because one of the things I do is executive coaching.
Good.
There's the very short-term stuff. Here's a particular problem, and in, 3 months,
Yep.
we address it, and we love each other, and we're done. And some of those, particularly with, more typical is 6, 9, or 12 months, I will say. But sometimes it's 3 months, and it's plenty. It handles the need. In other cases, when I am coaching within a consulting relationship, those really can go on for years.
Yes. Yeah, and I like for people to have this picture because I am hopeful that some of our organizations here in Northern California will reach out to you. I'm going to mirror something that you just said a moment ago, and that is where you're at a place where it's not your area of expertise, and you've been working long enough to be comfortable in knowing where your strengths lie and where somebody else might have more expertise in a particular area.
That's
and
right.
So I'm hoping that we inspire some people today actually to get in touch with you, get unstuck, and take their business to that next level. As you think about the many leaders that you've worked with over the years, I'm curious about any trends that you've seen in terms of key qualities that contribute to successful leadership. What has been your observation and experience, Liz?
I will say that the ones who do better in a more consistent kind of way have emotional intelligence.
There you go.
Self-awareness,
Yep.
the ability to seek and accept feedback, and a kind of ability to self-regulate. They are not the ones who go off into rages or have, one favorite one day and a different favorite the next day. They are much more even.
Yes.
You can be successful in business to the extent that you can make money, you can have a business that looks great, and you can be erratic and tempestuous and all kinds of things, but the people who work for you suffer that way. And that leads either to turnover or to holding on to people who are half working and resentful and, not really giving it their all. If you want employees to give their best, you have to know how to self-regulate. So that's one thing I would say for sure. The second thing is what you said about Bill Gates is absolutely right, but in today's world, you have to find ways or surrogates for that are quicker. It is very hard to take a week and go off and read.
Correct.
Every once in a while, somebody can go on retreat, in effect, but you've got to be learning all the time. And people who remove themselves from what's new, you don't have to do the cutting edge thing. It's often best not to be the first mover, but you need to know what's happening on the cutting edge and think about what is the good way that could be applied to us.
Exactly.
Or even, why should we never apply that to us and do the exact opposite, But you have to know what's going on out there, because otherwise it's harder to attract good talent, know what you want from them, and know how to keep it interesting for everybody so that you keep the good people.
Yes, that's really on my radar the last few months. I'm talking with several of the organizations that I work with, that when players feel as if they're being underutilized,
yes,
they're going to start looking for another job, and that employee retention numbers only tell part of the story, because what if it's only C players that are staying?
That's right.
And I just want to springboard on what you're saying about the importance of learning continually. In fact, I recommend that we live in such a fantastic time with this technology. To me, there's no reason to not be learning every day. Certainly I hope to be growing my podcast audience. We currently have listeners in 22 countries. I want to grow this audience, but I'm constantly recommending to my clients to listen to a variety of podcasts. It's so easy. It's free. You can learn anything about anything and as much of it as you want to. So I'm really glad that you made that point. And we're starting to get here into the final stretch, Liz. And whenever I have this fine opportunity to talk with thought leaders such as yourself, I do like to have that sense that we've gotten to know you a little bit, both professionally and personally. So I'm wondering, when you aren't working, how do you make time for fun, and what activities do you enjoy?
So one of the biggest fun things for me ever since I was a child is actually reading.
Yep.
Both for learning and for pleasure, although you do learn from fiction,
yes,
as well as from nonfiction. So I really just revel in reading when I can. But the other thing is spending time with people I love.
Yes.
Because that's how you get to not only feel close to others, but feel more like yourself and learn more about how you tick. And I think that's part of the emotional intelligence. That's how you get to plumb your own depths, So that, those are true. And the other things are just like that, put me in any museum and I'm happy.
Yes.
Botanical garden, anything where I can learn something new, see something interesting, satisfy my curiosity about something.
It's so fun. And there's just so much in this world, isn't there?
Oh, my goodness.
It's just so exciting to me to realize how much is still out there for us, and we just spend the rest of our life just getting out there every day and doing these things that you're talking about, and putting ourselves in environments where we have those great experiences. And I really appreciate you talking about reading. I recently saw a great little clip art from our local library that was about, if you really want to punish a reader, don't send her to her room.
Right. Right.
Because the
Very
best
good.
thing in the world for people like you and me is like, go to your room. Really? Great. That's awesome.
You see, my mother was very smart, and she would take away my library books.
Oh, no. Oh.
But that was a real punishment.
Oh, it certainly, just even thinking about it made me gasp. You hear
Yeah.
that? So I can imagine it. Yeah. The best thing in the world for me was to get sent to my room where I got to be with my books for a few hours
Right.
without my brother bugging me.
Exactly.
So let's talk about goals a little bit. We'll start with career goals. You mentioned that you're working on a new book. Do you want to tell us a little bit more about that and any other career goals that you have facing coming up this next year?
The book is really the one, I would say. I think it's going to be hard enough to do that.
Yep.
And it's going to be about how to put things on the table. Because going back to the discussion we had about the family businesses, figuring out how to get the issue on the table so other people can tolerate it and you can make progress it's not intuitive. It's so not natural, and it takes practice, and people are afraid of it. So if I can figure out how to tackle that in the book, I think it will be helpful to people. And I would say that is my big upcoming career goal.
Well, that's excellent. And I'm going to wish you well anytime I sit down in front of my computer, because I'm starting on my next book as well, and it's on communication and conflict. How about that? So I'm on the West Coast, you're on the East Coast. Let's get it done and meet somewhere in the middle and help as many people as we can.
Help a lot of people. Exactly.
It's exciting work. It's exciting. Taking a look at your personal goals upcoming this year, Liz, what are you looking at?
I'm really interested in some kind of dance. I love to dance, and I'm terrible at it. So I would like to learn something and get better at it, and I think that will help me enjoy it even more.
That's so fun. Do you have a particular type of dance that you are looking to start with?
No, I just like the idea of being able to go to any wedding or other event and feel totally comfortable.
Well, that's super fun. Maybe we can look forward to some videos on your YouTube channel or LinkedIn.
I do not think so. Even when I get good at it, I don't think that would be my way, but I would like to enjoy it my own self.
I love it. Well, listen, I recommend for all of our Relatable Leader audience members that they start reading your workplace wisdom blog that they can find on your website. And also, I want to encourage them to opt in for your free field guide for dealing with conflict at work. I've already let you know, and I'm just putting it out there one more time because I've got sales blood. Make sure to contact Liz if you're feeling like she said you've been neglecting something. If you can look at your numbers and see that you're plateauing, if you can see within your organization dynamics that you are now repeating the same conflicts over and over because we haven't gotten to root cause, want to encourage you to go to her website and contacted her and talk with her and get some insight there. Anything else you would recommend in terms of contacting you, Liz, or just in general, anything else you would like to share with the Relatable Leader audience?
No, you did such a beautiful job for me. Thank you very much. Of course, they can also find me on LinkedIn and Twitter. And there's just so much available to learn that can be applied, and might as well keep it fresh.
I love it. Let's keep it fresh with Liz Kislik. Happy birthday to you again. Thanks for sharing some of your time with us, and we all really appreciate you, Liz. Good luck with everything that's upcoming for you.
I really enjoyed it, Catherine. Thanks a bunch.
You bet. Take care now.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye.
Didn't I tell you? She's great. Putting together this episode, I enjoyed that interview all over again. Be sure to click on the show notes link in this podcast description. There you'll find links to Liz's website, her TED Talk, and then also her LinkedIn page, okay? Thank you for joining me here at the Relatable Leader podcast. It is my mission to support your success through tools and knowledge you can apply immediately. I look forward to connecting with you in the next episode. Until then, take good care of yourselves and lead by example.